They gave her the boring tasks, typing reports, scheduling meetings, organizing files for operations she supposedly had no clearance to understand. For 18 months, she smiled, nodded, and did exactly what they expected from the quiet woman in the corner office. But when foreign agents started picking off their assets one by one, and every secret they thought was secure somehow leaked to the enemy, the investigation led to a shocking truth. The secretary they barely noticed was actually the most experienced intelligence operative in the building. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of hidden power and invisible excellence resonates with you, consider subscribing to Hidden Heroes for more untold stories that will completely change how you see the people around you. The morning light filtered through the reinforced windows of the Defense Intelligence Agency, headquarters in Washington, D.C., casting geometric shadows across the polished floors of the 7th floor executive offices. In the corner of Conference Room 7B, Emily Carter sat at her modest desk, fingers flying across her keyboard with mechanical precision. At 34, she possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that made her invisible in crowded rooms. Medium height, brown hair always pulled back in a practical bun, clothes that were professional but never memorable, and a smile that was pleasant but never quite reached her penetrating gray eyes. "Carter, I need the Belgrade files from last month," Colonel James Morrison called out without looking up from his briefing materials. Morrison was a career military intelligence officer, 48 years old, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that filled rooms. He'd been running Eastern European operations for 3 years, and in all that time, he'd never bothered to learn his secretary's first name. "Right away, sir," Emily replied, her voice carrying the perfect tone of efficient deference. She rose from her desk and walked to the secure filing cabinet, her movements economical and purposeful. Within 30 seconds, she had retrieved the exact file Morrison needed, along with 2 related documents he hadn't asked for but would inevitably require. "Thank you," Morrison muttered, already absorbed in the intelligence reports. Around the conference table, 4 other senior officers were preparing for their weekly operational briefing, discussing classified missions and asset placements across Europe and the Middle East. They spoke freely, as they always did, assuming that Emily's security clearance was limited to basic administrative access. What they didn't know was that Emily Carter had been listening to every word of every classified briefing for 18 months. What they didn't know was that she had a perfect memory for operational details, asset identities, and security protocols. What they absolutely didn't know was that she had a PhD in international relations from Georgetown, spoke 6 languages fluently, and had been working for the CIA for 12 years. Colonel Morrison spread the Belgrade files across the table as his team assembled. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. Our assets in Serbia are reporting increased surveillance. Someone's been asking questions about our operations in the Balkans." Major Patricia Wells, the only other woman in the room besides Emily, leaned forward with concern. Wells was Morrison's second-in-command, a sharp intelligence analyst who had worked her way up through the ranks over 15 years. Unlike Morrison, she occasionally acknowledged Emily's presence with a nod or brief smile. "How serious is the compromise?" Wells asked. "Unknown," Morrison replied, shuffling through the documents Emily had provided. "But 3 of our contacts have gone dark in the past 2 weeks. Either they're being extra cautious, or they've been neutralized." Emily continued typing at her desk, her fingers maintaining their steady rhythm on the keyboard, but her attention was completely focused on the conversation. Every name, every operational detail, every security concern was being cataloged in her mind with professional precision. Lieutenant Colonel David Archer, Morrison's operations specialist, pointed to a map of southeastern Europe. "If our Serbian network is compromised, we need to assume our Romanian and Bulgarian contacts are also at risk. The patterns are too similar to be coincidental." Emily's typing paused for just a fraction of a second, a hesitation so brief that none of the officers noticed. But in that pause, her mind was racing through implications that went far beyond what the men at the conference table were discussing. "Carter," Morrison called out, still not looking in her direction, "I need you to type up a summary of this briefing for General Rodriguez, standard classification protocols." "Of course, sir," Emily replied, her voice maintaining its perfect tone of administrative compliance. But behind her unremarkable exterior, she was calculating risk assessments and operational security measures that would have impressed the most experienced intelligence handlers. As the briefing concluded and the officers filed out for lunch, Emily remained at her desk, ostensibly typing the meeting summary. In reality, she was composing a very different kind of document, an encrypted message that would be transmitted through secure channels to CIA headquarters in Langley. The message was brief but comprehensive. Asset network. Balkans compromised. Stop recommend immediate protective protocols. Stop suspect penetration at source level. Stop require authorization for defensive measures. Stop. 20 minutes later, Emily's secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. The response was equally concise. Authorization granted. Stop proceed with caution. Stop maintain cover at all costs. Stop. For the next 6 hours, Emily Carter performed her duties as administrative assistant with the same efficient professionalism she had demonstrated for 18 months. She typed reports, filed documents, answered phones, and scheduled meetings. But between these mundane tasks, she was conducting one of the most sophisticated counterintelligence operations in recent CIA history. Using her access to the building's communication systems, Emily traced the origin points of several suspicious data requests that had been made over the past month. Her position as Morrison's secretary gave her legitimate reasons to access personnel files, communication logs, and operational databases. What appeared to be routine administrative work was actually a methodical investigation into how classified information was being leaked to foreign intelligence services. By 6 p.m., most of the senior staff had departed for the day, leaving Emily alone in the office complex. This was when she could work most effectively, free from the constraints of maintaining her cover identity. She activated several sophisticated monitoring programs she had quietly installed on the building's computer network over the past year, programs that would track and analyze communication patterns for security anomalies. What Emily discovered in the next 2 hours would have significant implications for American intelligence operations across 3 continents. The leak wasn't coming from compromised assets in the field. It was coming from inside the DIA headquarters itself. Someone with high-level security clearance was systematically providing classified operational details to foreign intelligence services. More disturbing, the breach had been ongoing for at least 8 months, coinciding with the failure of several major intelligence operations in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Emily's analysis identified 3 potential suspects, all of whom had access to the compromised information and opportunity to transmit it without detection. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, and it pointed to a level of penetration that threatened not just individual operations, but the entire intelligence network in several key regions. As Emily compiled her findings, she faced a challenge that went to the heart of her deep cover assignment. To properly investigate and neutralize the security breach, she would need to reveal capabilities and access levels that went far beyond what a secretary should possess. But maintaining her cover was essential to the larger operation she was conducting, an operation so classified that even Morrison and his team had no knowledge of its existence. The next morning brought an emergency briefing. Colonel Morrison arrived at the office earlier than usual, his expression grim as he reviewed overnight intelligence reports. Major Wells and Lieutenant Colonel Archer were already in Conference Room 7B, spreading classified documents across the table with uncharacteristic urgency. "Carter," Morrison called out as Emily arrived precisely at 7 a.m., "cancel my morning appointments. We have a crisis situation." "Yes, sir," Emily replied, immediately beginning to rearrange his schedule while simultaneously observing the unusual activity around the conference table. "Gentlemen," Morrison began once the team was assembled, "we've lost 3 more assets overnight. Our entire network in Romania has gone silent. Either they're all being extremely cautious or they've been completely compromised." Major Wells looked up from a classified communication she was reviewing. "Sir, this isn't random operational hazard. Someone is systematically targeting our assets with inside knowledge of their identities and operational schedules." Emily's typing slowed as she absorbed the implications. The situation was deteriorating faster than she had anticipated, and her investigation from the previous evening was taking on critical urgency. "The question," Lieutenant Colonel Archer said grimly, "is whether we're dealing with electronic surveillance of our communications or human intelligence penetration of our operations." Morrison paced in front of the conference table, his military bearing reflecting the stress of the situation. "Either way, we need to assume that our security has been fundamentally compromised. Everything we've planned for the next 6 months may need to be reconsidered. Emily continued her typing, but her mind was focused on a more immediate concern. Based on her analysis from the previous evening, she knew that the source of the leaks was likely in this room or had access to information that originated in this room. The investigation she was conducting had identified security vulnerabilities that required immediate action, but taking that action would expose her true role and capabilities. Over the next 3 days, the crisis escalated. 7 more intelligence assets across Eastern Europe were either captured or forced to abandon their operations. Communication intercepts suggested that foreign intelligence services had detailed knowledge of American operational plans, asset identities, and security protocols. Colonel Morrison's team worked around the clock, trying to identify the source of the leaks and implement protective measures for their remaining assets. Emily maintained her role as administrative support, but she was simultaneously conducting her own investigation using resources and methodologies that went far beyond her official capabilities. On Thursday evening, as Emily worked alone in the office after the senior staff had departed, she made a breakthrough that changed everything. Hidden within the metadata of routine communication logs, she discovered evidence of unauthorized data transfers that had been occurring for nearly a year. The transfers were sophisticated, designed to look like routine system maintenance activities, but Emily's analysis revealed that classified operational data was being systematically copied and transmitted to external servers. More significantly, the pattern of data access matched the work schedule and system usage of someone with intimate knowledge of the office's daily routines. The perpetrator wasn't just someone with security clearance. It was someone who understood the rhythms and patterns of the intelligence operation well enough to extract information without triggering standard security protocols. Emily's investigation had identified the source of the leaks, but the identity of the perpetrator would require more direct action to confirm. Using her administrative access to schedule a series of late-evening meetings over the next week, Emily created opportunities to observe the suspect's behavior and system usage patterns outside of normal working hours. By Friday afternoon, Emily had gathered enough evidence to identify the source of the security breach with high confidence. The discovery was both shocking and strategically challenging. The person responsible for compromising American intelligence operations was Major Patricia Wells, Morrison's trusted second-in-command, and the one person in the office who had shown Emily even basic professional courtesy. Wells had been using her legitimate access to operational databases to extract classified information, which she then transmitted to foreign intelligence services through a sophisticated network of encrypted communications and dead-drop protocols. Her position as Morrison's deputy gave her comprehensive knowledge of ongoing operations, and her reputation for professionalism had kept her above suspicion. But Wells had made one critical error. She had underestimated the capabilities of the quiet secretary who organized the files she was stealing. Emily now faced the most challenging decision of her career. Exposing Wells would save American intelligence assets and protect ongoing operations, but it would also require revealing her own identity and ending a deep cover assignment that had taken 3 years to establish. The broader operation she was conducting, monitoring and analyzing intelligence activities across the entire DIA hierarchy, would be compromised if she revealed her true capabilities. On Monday morning, Emily made her choice. She arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., 30 minutes earlier than usual, and used her access to Morrison's computer system to plant evidence that would lead him to discover Wells's treachery through his own investigation. Using her knowledge of his analytical methods and investigative instincts, Emily arranged for Morrison to find specific communication logs and data transfer records that would point him toward the correct conclusion. The plan required precise timing and careful orchestration. Emily needed Morrison to discover the evidence naturally, without suspecting that he was being guided toward the truth. She spent the morning creating a series of subtle anomalies in Wells's computer usage that would trigger the security monitoring systems, ensuring that Morrison's attention would be drawn to the right data at the right time. At 10:30 a.m., Emily's carefully laid plan began to unfold. "Carter," Morrison called out, reviewing his morning intelligence briefings, "I'm seeing some irregularities in our system access logs. Can you pull the detailed usage reports for the past month?" "Certainly, sir," Emily replied, already anticipating his request. She had prepared the exact reports he would need. with the suspicious activities highlighted in ways that would appear natural, but would catch Morrison's experienced eye. As Morrison reviewed the data, Emily watched his expression change from casual interest to focused concern to growing alarm. He was seeing the same patterns she had identified: unauthorized data access, unusual communication activities, and system usage that didn't match official work schedules. "Carter, I need you to get Major Wells in here immediately," Morrison said, his voice tight with controlled tension. 20 minutes later, Major Wells entered conference room 7B with her usual professional demeanor, unaware that her 18-month operation had been discovered. Emily continued her typing, maintaining the appearance of routine administrative work while observing one of the most significant counterintelligence confrontations of her career. "Patricia," Morrison began, his voice carefully controlled, "I need you to explain some irregularities in your computer usage patterns." Wells's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a microsecond of surprise that she quickly masked with professional confusion. "What kind of irregularities, sir?" Morrison spread the usage reports across the conference table. "System access at 11:30 p.m. on dates when you weren't officially working late. Database queries for operational information outside your immediate area of responsibility. Communication activities that don't match your assigned duties." Emily's typing continued steadily, but every muscle in her body was tense as she watched Wells calculate her response. This was the critical moment when Wells would either confess, attempt to deflect suspicion, or try to destroy evidence. Wells chose deflection. "Sir, I often work late on complex analyses. Sometimes I need to cross-reference operations outside my immediate assignment to provide comprehensive assessments. I thought that level of thoroughness was what you expected." Morrison studied Wells's face with the careful attention of an experienced intelligence officer. "Patricia, these aren't analytical cross-references. These are comprehensive data extractions of operational details, asset identities, and security protocols. Some of this information is classified above your clearance level." The room fell silent except for the steady sound of Emily's typing. Wells' carefully maintained composure began to crack as she realized the extent of Morrison's knowledge. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," Wells said, but her voice lacked conviction. Morrison activated his secure phone and spoke quietly to someone at CIA headquarters. Within minutes, 2 counterintelligence specialists arrived at conference room 7B to take Wells into custody. As the handcuffs were applied, Wells looked directly at Emily for the first time in 18 months. "You," she said, her voice filled with sudden understanding. "You're not just a secretary." Emily's typing never faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't understand what you mean." But Wells's accusation hung in the air as she was escorted from the building, leaving Morrison staring at his administrative assistant with new questions in his eyes. After the counterintelligence team departed with Wells, Morrison sat alone in conference room 7B, reviewing the events of the morning. Emily continued her work, but she could sense his analytical mind working through the implications of what had just occurred. "Carter," Morrison said finally, "how long have you been working in this office?" 18 months, sir," Emily replied without looking up from her computer. "And in all that time, you've never once asked a question about the classified materials you handle, never shown curiosity about the operations we discuss, never made a single error in organizing highly complex intelligence documents." Emily's typing slowed slightly. "I understand the importance of confidentiality in this environment, sir. I try to focus on my assigned duties." Morrison walked over to Emily's desk and looked at her computer screen. What he saw there made him step back in surprise. Instead of the routine administrative document he expected, Emily was working on a comprehensive analysis of Eastern European intelligence networks, complete with threat assessments, operational recommendations, and strategic projections that would have impressed senior analysts at CIA headquarters. "Who are you?" Morrison asked quietly. Emily saved her document, closed her computer, and looked up at Morrison with eyes that no longer held the deferential expression of a secretary. "Emily Carter, Central Intelligence Agency, Special Operations Division. I've been conducting a long-term counterintelligence operation under deep cover assignment." Morrison sat down heavily in the chair across from Emily's desk. "How long?" 3 years total assignment, 18 months in this office." Emily's voice had changed subtly. Still professional, but with the confident authority of someone who had been making life-and-death decisions for over a decade. "Your real background?" "HD International Relations, Georgetown. 12 years CIA, specializing in counterintelligence and penetration operations. Previous assignments in Moscow, Beijing, and Damascus. Current mission, assess and monitor security vulnerabilities in DIA intelligence operations. Morrison stared at the woman he had treated as invisible for 18 months. And you've been watching us this entire time. Protecting you, Emily corrected gently. My assignment was to identify and neutralize security threats to American intelligence operations. Major Wells represented exactly the kind of penetration my mission was designed to detect. For several minutes, Morrison sat in silence, processing the revelation that his secretary was actually one of the most experienced intelligence operatives in the American intelligence community. What happens now? He asked finally. Emily gathered her personal items from the desk she had occupied for 18 months. Now I file my report. Wells faces prosecution for espionage, and your operations in Eastern Europe can be reconstructed with proper security protocols. And you? Emily smiled, the first genuine smile Morrison had ever seen from her. I receive a new assignment, probably another office, another identity, another group of dedicated professionals who need protecting from threats they can't see coming. As Emily prepared to leave conference room 7B for the last time, Morrison stood and extended his hand. I owe you an apology, and probably my career. Emily shook his hand with the firm grip of an equal. You owe me nothing, Colonel. You and your team are patriotic Americans doing essential work under impossible conditions. My job was to make sure you could continue that work safely. Will I ever know the full extent of what you prevented? Emily picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Probably not, but I can tell you that American intelligence assets across 3 continents are alive today because you were thorough enough to follow up on those computer usage reports. As Emily reached the door, Morrison called after her. For what it's worth, you were the best administrative assistant I ever worked with. Emily paused and looked back with that same genuine smile. For what it's worth, Colonel, you run one of the most professional intelligence operations I've had the privilege to protect. 6 months later, Colonel Morrison received a classified communique from CIA headquarters commending his counterintelligence work in identifying and neutralizing a significant security breach. The commendation made no mention of Emily Carter, but included a single line that Morrison understood perfectly. The most effective intelligence operatives are often the ones you never notice. In a small office in the State Department, a new administrative assistant named Sarah Wilson began her first day of work, organizing files and answering phones for senior officials responsible for Middle Eastern policy. She was unremarkable in appearance, efficient in her duties, and invisible to the important people who walked past her desk every day. None of them suspected that Sarah Wilson was actually Emily Carter, beginning another deep cover assignment to protect American interests from threats that hid in plain sight. After all, the best intelligence operatives are always the ones you never see coming.